Praise the Lord. A warm welcome to you, my dear brothers and sisters, to listen to the good news. And today's good news is taken from the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 2, verse 18 to 22. In this little passage, we meditate on the main question asked by the Pharisees to Jesus. They say, why do John's disciples and the disciples of Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? The question of fasting is put forward before Jesus when his disciples were not fasting and following the religious rule of that time, whereas the disciples of John and the disciples of Pharisees were fasting. Now this Pharisees question Jesus in order to bring before the public that the disciples of Jesus not following the tradition or the religious activity which is supposed to be done, they are not doing. In order to highlight their drawback, they question Jesus and mention the problem that your disciples do not fast. Now, Pharisees' concern was mainly to keep up the religious rules and regulations and religious practices. They had nothing to do with that practices, whether the religious activity, whether it is fasting, whether it is praying, whether it is alms giving. They did not intend out of that to be led by the Spirit or to grow in their spiritual life. They wanted to keep up the religious duties and activities and norms only for the sake of keeping up. Only for the sake of keeping up. They did not intend or expect any growth, any sort of spiritual growth out of that. That is the reason Jesus in a way answers to them when to fast. When to fast and why to fast. That is the main concern to understand. Why to fast and when to fast. That should be known very clearly. What is the purpose of fasting or why we should fast? What is the goal that I want to achieve? What is the target that I have before me when I do some religious practices? That should be very clear. Unless and until I have a set goal before me, before doing any religious activities, those religious activities will mean nothing to me. So in order to draw benefit out of religious practices, whether that be anything, fasting or prayer or alms giving or any sacrifice, out of that I should be benefiting in my spiritual life. I should be growing in my spiritual life. If that religious practices does not allow me to grow in Jesus, in my spiritual life, then all those practices are simply in vain. Makes no sense to me. Therefore, Jesus wants us to understand the spirit of religious activity, not for the sake of keeping up the religious practices we should keep, but the spirit of religious practices we should understand. When we understand that, then we really grow in our spiritual life. Therefore, the passage goes like this. At that time, John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, and people came and said to Jesus, why do John's disciples and the disciples of Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Why they do so? Whereas the rule is there, why they don't follow the rule? Why they don't follow the religious norm? Fasting is very important aspect of religious life. Why they don't follow? That is the question asked to Jesus. And Jesus said to them, can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? Jesus answers them with a question to pause and ponder over. What is the question? Can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? Now, bridegroom Jesus himself is with them. They are in the presence of Jesus and they are enjoying the presence of Jesus all around, and they are celebrating, they are happy, they are rejoicing in the company of their master Jesus. Now, when a person is in in the presence of God, living and experiencing the presence of God, then what is the need for fasting? There is no need for fasting. Therefore, Jesus answers, as long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. Suppose they are not in the presence of God, they are not living a life in accordance to the gospel, kingdom values as per the precepts of God, then certainly they should fast and pray in order to come in the presence of God and to live a good, holy life, in order to live a life worthy of their call. Then they should fast, they should adopt some religious practices. Other than that, there is no meaning. That is what Jesus responds to them. Now they will not fast because they are already in the presence of God, enjoying the presence of God, living the presence of God. Therefore, there is no need for them to fast. Therefore, when the wedding guest is there, as long as the bridegroom is with them, they cannot fast. The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. No one. Then that way he says and explains to them the need of religious practices. All this should lead us for our spiritual growth, to grow in our faith, grow in Jesus, in the values of Jesus that Jesus has set before us. Therefore, we need to inculcate all those religious practices with a purpose of growing in our spiritual life. Only merely keeping up the rules and regulations, that will not help anybody in any way. Therefore, Jesus is very clear in telling us through this passage that all the religious practices should be leading us to God, leading us to Jesus, leading us to live a holy life, life that pleases to God. Therefore, all this practices should lead us for an integrated personality, which means there should not be any sort of dichotomy. All that I do, think and say and behave, everything should manifest my spiritual life, my spiritual depth and authenticity of my spiritual life. There should not be any sort of show, duplicacy in my spiritual life, which the Pharisees had. Therefore, Jesus in a way did not like their attitude, but through them and through the question, Jesus answers to all of us that we should be living an